Schön, dass du da bist. Das war ein sehr, sehr faszinierender Vortrag. Ich hole mal noch jemand dazu, damit wir hier die Runde erweitern, denn wenn ich schon einen Komplexitäts...
Thank you. I'm going to take somebody else up on stage here, because if I have a complexity reader on stage here, I would also like to have an expert that helps us to simplify complex things. And you all know her from her column Pies of Truth, Torten der Wahrheit, and her podcast Fix und 40. Here is Katja Berlin.
Kommt zu uns.
Hallo.
Hey, join us. Hi.
So, das ist doch eine großartigere Runde, kann man sich gar nicht vorstellen.
I couldn't imagine a better round up here. So, Dirk, maybe let's talk about your talk first. You showed us how complexity research works and what some of the key facts of this area of research are. I thought it was pretty fascinating when you had this graphic that showed complexity in the center, and then out of these disciplines around that flow into each other and affect each other and work together. Towards the end, you spoke a lot about symbiosis, the aphid that gets wings from a virus. So the question is, what's next after symbiosis? What can we expect next from symbiosis? Or to get to the core of my question, will we also get wings? Yeah, in a certain way this might happen. I touched on this, that a lot of the way we think in the natural sciences, in the social sciences, but also in society, is largely influenced by elements from, for example, neo-Darwinism, social Darwinism, and traces from way in the past, and those are the driving forces. And now in the natural sciences, especially in biology, there is a sort of revolution happening where you see, oh, this has arrived, but it's not essential. So what is essential are the new connections networking. So if we are smart, then we look at that very closely and hope to discover new things that we can then translate into communal benefits. And for example, you see it in things like car sharing, which is in the end a cooperative mechanism. Or if you look at teamwork, there's a lot of people that research, for example, how experts work in teams and how that works better than the best individual in the team. So if you take these natural principles of symbiosis or mutualism or cooperation and you realize things that you then perceive as the natural and translate it into something societal. So, as a complexity researcher, you mentioned you're looking for patterns and disciplines that are self-similar, and you are a biologist by education. So my only commonality between physics and biology is that I've sucked at both. If you have to go into a field that is new to you, isn't that anxiety-inducing at first, because every time you have to actively research against your ignorance in a specific area? No, not actually. Science is about the creation of knowledge. So you're always in a state or moved by a power out of ignorance. But you're always in ignorance. You want to know something that you don't already know, understand something you haven't understood yet. So that's a permanent state. If I go into areas such as social sciences, why not? I mean, I can ask smart, big questions, and many people have done so in the past. And sometimes the naive view is actually quite smart, because you're not so biased from all the pre-existing knowledge and so on. And if you're not afraid to ask stupid questions, then that's not an issue at all. The old Sesame Street mantra, if you don't ask questions, you'll remain ignorant. Katja, you're doing kind of the opposite of what Dirk does. Dirk is always looking at complex systems and trying to connect everything, and you have this red thread on the pinboard. You're trying to break everything down to its essence in your publications, where you try to explain the world using pie charts. How complicated is it to break things down to this core essential? Well, effectively, I'm doing under-complexity research. There's a point that I have to find that I can then visualize graphically. And these pie charts as a visualization aid are so badly suited for explaining the world that, yes, it's always just a singular view. It's not the truth. And that makes it okay. So I guess the question is now, what can you two learn from each other? How can it be helpful for complexity research, trying to remove realities so far from everything surrounding them that only a core remains that you can use to compare to something else? So, if I may comment on this, I think these pies of truth are exactly the essence of complexity research. I showed a few pictures before, this large bubble with non-pathogenic bacteria and the pathogenic ones, and just this relationship. And this is very similar to what motivates the pie charts. You compare two numbers, but in our heads the relationships are often wrong. The pie charts are important because they visualize very clearly this much versus this little. And I have to get back to the COVID pandemic again. Lots of people said, oh, you know, we've handled this pretty well, but now we have 2,500 deaths per million inhabitants. And Japan, for example, has less by a factor of 50. And, you know, that's a factor of 50. It's like going for a walk versus flying on a jumbo jet. So that's the kind of relation we're talking about here. And that works very well in the pie charts because it shows relations. And that is just a fact you show, but we always have these caricatures in our head. So when I hear somebody like Dirk has to get into all of these different fields of research to find patterns and then compare them, how is it when you create the pie charts? Do you have to spend a lot of time researching these facts to then figure out how you can simplify them down? Or is it a similar approach? No, they always look very small, but I actually spend a lot of work on them. So the biggest part of the process is reading and understanding and thinking. And then I think for me it's often the way that I look at the narratives around the topic. I think a lot of us are thinking, you know, we have to process reality less complex than it actually is, because otherwise we'll be overwhelmed. And I think that's how often narratives are created, or perspectives that are just accepted as given. And I think about it and I ask myself, is it actually correct the way we think about it, or is it maybe a bit different? And when I figure that out, then it usually gets to be a good pie chart. One other thing I asked myself, you showed this example of the Starling Swarm, which flies in a diffuse pattern that we cannot quite grasp easily. And then you explained how that happens, or how complexity research explains that. And at some point we've all wondered how these swarms happen and how these patterns happen. And there's a lot of different models to explain the way that they fly this way. For example, I can remember some people said they are aligning themselves to the Earth's magnetic field, and that's why they look this way. So how many maybe crude attempts or weird or even completely valid theories do you have to dig through until you find a way that brings you to where you want to be? Or maybe not, but end up being. It's very different. There's some things you spend a lot of time on. A little bit like the Picasso sketches I showed, the process is quite similar. You try something here and there, and then maybe you have a hunch, it's something explorative. And methodically you add your experience, but sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes it's there a snap and you have it immediately. I think it's very similar to, for example, music or composition. I think for myself, at least, this process of science is very synthetic. It's not analytical in this sense, but you want to build something, construct something that explains what I see. And you're completely right. Sometimes there's this model, and they're competing with each other, and some of them might be a bit more stable or less stable, and sometimes things crystallize out that let you make very stable forecasts or predictions or conclusions. And do you have to sometimes go into your own research and challenge that? Oh yeah, all the time. That sounds exhausting. Yeah, a little bit, but it's like wandering through the jungle. It can be quite exciting, and sometimes you get stung, and some things are maybe a bit less comfortable. And I have to fight a lot against my own exhaustion, but yeah, we all do. So there's ups and downs.
Vielen Dank, lieber Dirk, dass du heute bei uns warst.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for being here today and giving us a bit of an insight into how your research works. You will also be signing your book here soon. We've seen the title before, The Forest for the Trees. There's a booth by Dussmann here where all the books of all our speakers are available. I think Katja might also be there later. But yeah, Dirk will be there for book signing soon. Thank you very much for being here. And please give a big hand for Dirk.
Danke dir.